let's pick a different color here. Purple. I don't know. That might be. We got pink. What's this, like a taupe? Let's go with taupe. Why not change it up a little bit? You guys can see that, right? Okay. So relative minimum. Okay, relative minimum is another point, another behavior on the graph that we want to identify, and the reason is because um, when you're talking about, again, I don't want to keep referencing calculus because it's still a year away for a lot of people, but when a graph changes its behavior at a relative minimum, which is this, we'll define it in a second, that's telling me that an object is changing its direction. And calculus is a big time study in motion. Okay, so when you achieve a relative minimum point, okay, there's a bunch of other stuff that you talk about, like inflection points, and you talk about derivatives and zero derivatives and things like that. Identifying a relative min on a graph becomes very useful for us. Okay, so a relative minimum point, like in a different video, I refer to the relative max as the top of a bump. A relative minimum is the bottom of a valley. Okay, so it's again where we see on a graph that a function would have been decreasing, right? Decreasing interval here, and then it hits a bottoming out point, and then it begins to turn up into an increasing value, okay, or into an increasing interval. Okay, so again, this is where a graph turns, okay, from decreasing to increasing, from decreasing to increasing. Okay, and when we express a relative minimum, all right, again, when we want to say the relative minimum of this function is, it's a y value. So we would say the minimum is y equals 2. It is this y value at that point that is the minimum. Okay, it occurs at x equals 0, right? So the minimum is 2, but it occurs at 0 when x is 0. And I realize, again, it's semantics. It's the way that, certain textbooks, certain online math programs are going to express it in a couple of different ways. For my money, in my opinion, if you say that the relative minimum is 0, 2, you've identified the point, right? You know where that point is. It's the y coordinate by definition, right? That is the actual relative minimum. And just as another point in case, if you had this graph that came down here, okay, and then let's say it turned back up, it's okay to have 2 relative minimum points, okay? You would express them both separately. This isn't the minimum compared to this. This is, again, what we would call an absolute minimum because it is lower than this one, all right? But we would call each of these a relative min because they're both bottoms of a valley, all right? Expressed in terms of its y coordinate.